Hello, Eytan. Great to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks, Daniel. Pumped to be here.
Eytan is an amazing guest. He is the CMO of Freitos. He started from the CEO's basement, and today they are over $1 billion annually. And today we are going to talk about content that actually converts and that customers love. There are a lot of challenges in the world of content. How do you know that it's working? Sometimes it's ghost town, you post, nothing happens. And Eitan is here to help us succeed with creating content. So Eitan, how about first you introduce yourself in your own words and then give us your pitch. Give us your
Sure.
angle for how you go about content.
Awesome. Yeah. So again, thanks for having me, Daniel. Excited about this. My name is Eytan Buchman. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Freitos. Freitos is a global freight booking platform that connects between airlines, ocean liners, freight companies, and importers. Literally every single thing in your house, your cups and your computers and your clothing all comes from somewhere. And I've always kind of thought about this like Space Mountain at Disney, but with the lights on, right? So like we're all on this ride, and you don't see this whole underbelly of what cuts to our front door. It's this massive, massive industry, one of the largest industries in the world after finance, supply chain, and every single it's this overbearing, huge industry that we do not think about. When I first got to Freightos, it just like opened my eyes. But I am by nature a geek, huge geek. Have always been into programming. Have always been into like tinkering around a little bit, and then that merged with really being interested in storytelling and general. I think being excited about being able to find the right message for a very very specific audience, and that's kind of accompanied me. I spent a long time in government, and then when I decided that I wanted to shift into high tech, I took that exact same strategy of how do you find the right message for the right audience? I found 20 companies that excited me and just cold pitched the CEOs. And then one of them introduced me to a VC who introduced me to Freightos. Freightos is my first high tech job. So I joined 11 years ago. I'm like a dinosaur in high tech years. So I joined in our CEO's basement and just have had the privilege of growing together with the company. I guess, on top of that, father of three young kids and love playing guitar and have been infatuated with AI for about a year and a half now.
It sounds like you have a super interesting history both in the high tech world and amazing success right off the bat. And yes, 11 years is pretty much unheard of these days, and a lot of hobbies going on too. So let's talk about content. How do you view content? What does it mean for you, and what does it mean for a company?
Yeah, so I would start off with that with a kind of a story of where I actually started to meet content in a B2B marketing capacity, which is we spent the first year that I was in Freightos, and again, my first high tech job, I think I probably spent a lot of time just looking on Wikipedia of like, what is marketing? What is marketing strategy? What is blog? And really just checking in and following, following every single thing that you're supposed to be doing, posting on LinkedIn once a day and putting up a blog post once a week and, paying money for events that didn't do anything. And I had this really annoying German salesperson who just kept on bugging me and was like, you need to do something different, Eitan. You need to do something different. And he was amazing. This guy, like I think, looking back, he really changed the course of Fredos and my own professional trajectory. And I went to a trade show in Dublin, Web Summit, which was a colossal mistake. Money down the toilet. Like you get there and it's just like we're selling a very specific solution at the time for freight companies to automate their import, their quoting to customers. Very niche, very specific, right? This is not my audience. Web Summit is not my audience at all. These one of these like massive conferences where they put a lot into brands. So we had like tie-dye sheep with like the roaming around in the fields there. And half a day into the conference I was like, this is not for us. We had one of these like stupid little booths there and or kind of like those like standing booths. And just like talking to people and just like seeing their eyes glaze over when you mention the word freight and you just realize it's not working. So I halfway through the first day, I went back to my hotel room or whatever motel. We were early stage startup. I was staying, turns out, at the same hotel that blanking on the name now, but like famous. I'll come back to me before the end of the episode. That a famous Irish author had written his books from, and I just went into the room and I was thinking about what this like German salesperson said, and thinking about, hey, this isn't my audience. And I was like, hey, look, we have a very specific niche that we focus on, and I'm never in the B2B. A reality of B2B marketing is you almost never will know more than the person that you're selling to. If I am in the soft logistics space, I'm selling to a logistics professional who spent 20 years focusing on logistics. I'm not going to out logistics him. He's going to forget more this week about logistics than I'll ever learn. But if I can really hammer down, like I can understand logistics technology as it pertains to online sales of freight, I can learn more about that than this guy will know. And I just sat down and I tried to map out, what do I know? What is a thesis? What is I think West Cow calls this a spiky opinion. What is something that is informed and articulate, but a little bit different, and that I have conviction about. And I wrote a white paper around it. It was a 3-page kind of like research paper about like, here's what the future of online freight is, and here's 4 stages on how we get there. And I banged it out over the course of that, the kind of what I guess what from outside will feel like very, very boring brainstorming around it. But I got back and we sent it out to a couple of customers and they were really interested in it. And it just like suddenly, I think it like flipped a switch. And I was like, oh, that's how you do it, right? You need to come up with something that drives value in the same way that as a startup, you're trying to build a product that has product market fit. You need to find the right content that has content market fit, that educates and interests people and gets them in the front door and is close enough to the product that you're selling in order to make sure that you can make that seamless transition from content into sales. And I think that is still, that was 10 years ago, and that still informs how I approach content today, which is like build the perfect content for the exact right people, and then the rest will follow.
That sounds awesome. So, what were the next steps for you after you realized the white paper worked? Or let me ask this first. What exactly happened how did you release that white paper and what were the results of it? And then following that, what were your next steps? How did you map in your mind what are the next steps for creating similar content that are going to get me more customers?
So, transparently, the results of that specific white paper were fairly inconsequential from a specific, publication perspective. I think for me, the most significant thing was like, okay, this is a better way to do things. Then I went back to the drawing board and I was like, okay, well, how can I actually stick out? And I think that was the second real shift for me. Was it's not enough to just say, hey, I have a thesis, I have an idea. I think sometimes that works well, and there's some companies, even from a content perspective, that you could see took that idea and ran with it. I think Superhuman is a great idea, right? Superhuman is a great example where 2 very noteworthy content themes that they pushed for a while. The first one was a very, very famous product market fit framework that they put together on in early days. How do you build product market fit and how do you measure it? And beyond implementing that internally, they wrote very, very long posts about it and did media blitzes around interviewing around that idea of content and educating. And that was purely based on a thesis. And then they did the same thing a couple of years later where they made a parallel between SaaS development and how you develop a computer game, about how you kind of like need to have slight friction in order to get the person to kind of break through that friction and beat the first boss. And then they have a moment of elation. And then you have to give them another boss, but you always have to make them feel like they're having progress. And that's one type of content, which is like you have a really, really, really powerful thesis and you can articulate it. I didn't feel like that was enough to really coast on. And the next shift that I had that was built on the fact that I was like, okay, this is the right direction, was bring in the right data or insights that are sourced from the experts. And I think this was the kind of almost brings me to my content perception today, which is really bringing the perfect data. And the perfect data in this case, go back again, we were selling at the time what was basically a tool that would help companies like UPS or FedEx or other large freight companies create an online sales portal where, as an importer, you could go to their website, instantly get a freight quote if you're shipping a container or shipping large amounts of products, and then book it on their website. And shockingly, this is still not something that actually exists for most importers and most freight companies today. But the way that I decided to create noteworthy content there was we created a fake company. I built a fake website of a fake company. I registered a fake phone number. And I created an email address for this company. And I just tried to get freight quotes online from the top 20 global freight companies. And I documented my experience. I wrote down like, hey, what is, how hard is it? How long does it take me to find the request a quote button? If they don't have one, is it an email form? Once I send it in, am I getting emails back? Am I getting a phone call? Am I getting an instant freight quote? How long does it take for me to get the price? What's the price spread between everybody? Am I getting the price quote in a nice formatted PDF? Just really just documenting everything because I didn't know what would be useful. And then I took that and I created 20 bespoke reports, one for each of the companies that I benchmarked. And I blurred out the entire report besides the front page. I basically gave it to the one guy who was on our sales team. And I said, hey, email the VP sales at UPS and say, would you like to see how your online sales process compares to your 19 top competitors? And that is like perfect content market fit, because every single large organization in the world is one of the things that like will wake them up at any given moment is like, what are my competitors doing? right? Because you're a large company, you have your rate, your market is saturated, and it's all a zero sum game of how do I steal from customers and from other competitors. And that was a really, really, really good fit. And our response rate for that was through the roof. People were very, very interested in seeing it. We got in the door and had conversations with over half of our target market from those top 20 freight forwarders. And then we said, okay, well, let's take this to the next level. I now have a benchmark of the top 20 companies. Let's turn this into a research report that says, hey, what is the state of online freight sales as a whole within the industry? And then we combined that one research report with media pitching. I mean, we, like me, it was just a one person show at that time, media pitching that out. And when I say media pitching, this isn't heavy PR, it's just email 15 reporters that you feel like would be interested in the logistics space, and combine that with LinkedIn advertising around that same report. And it worked so well that we actually are still doing this today. Like every single year, we run that same exact report. We've expanded it a little bit more, but it's something of like, this is related to our product. It has a very, very defined audience. It has a very, very defined value for that audience. It is unique data within the industry, and it just works. And I think that was kind of the evolution of like, okay, create the right content. But this is a really, really good strategy to create that right content.
That's amazing. So let's say I want to create something similar like that today. Can you tell me how exactly you go about messaging your ICP? Like what would an example message be? And then what would an example report contain? Like let's say in this case.
I think that the place where this would normally start, if you're an early stage company that's trying to create content for content along those lines for an ICP, starts at the same place that your product person would typically start. In many cases, this is all the same person, right? The CEO, co-founder, whatever. You have a ton of conversations with your target audience. And even if you're not speaking to them every single day, you're seeing what they're writing about, you're seeing what the reporters are writing about, you're seeing what the agendas are at the large conferences, and events, and seeing what people are speaking about and what people are scared about and what they're curious about. And that creates your general that's your board, right? That's what you're looking at when it comes to what content and what is the space of the content that I should be creating. And then you think about what is the best way to source unique proprietary data in order to build some type of insight. And our the way that I started to do that was with mystery shopping, but it really doesn't need to be that. Like there's so many sources of data that are out there over the years. Just as an example, everybody there was a period, a good decade period where everybody was terrified that Amazon was going to take over their business. It doesn't matter what business you were in, right? That Amazon was coming. So of course, supply chain and logistics had that too, where everybody thought that Amazon was going to become a freight company and just kill everyone. And one of the ways that we source data in order to kind of ride that train was I hired on Upwork back before AI let anybody develop this stuff. I hired a data analyst on Upwork and I got him to scrape Amazon's career website for all supply chain related jobs and to put together a data analysis around all the job postings for supply chain on Amazon. So we got insights in what types of expertise were Amazon looking for, what type of background were they looking for, things in like warehousing or in international shipping, and we put together a report about that. Now, if you were paying attention earlier, like the that doesn't tick all the boxes of great content, right? I think it ticks the boxes in terms of topics people are curious about and unique information and really good content market fit. But what that content was really missing is that had nothing to do with my product. In order to sell from that, didn't really do anything. So we got a lot of attention, we got a lot of readers, and maybe it had some ancillary benefits for brand. But I think long term, I probably wouldn't have gone in that direction. The right move there was being able to find unique data. Another example, when you don't necessarily have that data, during an annual climate conference, we spend 25 minutes, half an hour going through academic articles with Google Scholar and finding different analyses of what global shipping's total carbon footprint was. And we put together a meta analysis based off of those different academic estimates that we found. We pitched that meta analysis to the Wall Street Journal reporter who we knew was at the Carbon Conference, who was covering shipping and logistics. And she published an article that headlined with our estimate based off of these academic articles. So you can always find proprietary data, you can always find information. And certainly once you have a couple of customers, it becomes easier. The lazier or easier way to do that, especially if you've been having conversations with customers, is surveys. And I'm a huge advocate of when you have the right distribution, you don't need to have 1,000 people to survey. You need to have 20 of the right people. If you look at McKinsey or if you look at Deloitte reports, when they talk about their, CEO reports on what is the state of the industry, very frequently the end for those surveys is like 30 or 40 people, but they're asking the right questions from the right people. So if you're a founder and you've had 10 people that you've spoken to and reached the stage where you're like, hey, do you want to be a design partner? And then another 20 people that you've engaged with that you were introduced from friends. All you need to do is put together a short 5-question survey with the right questions, send it out to those 30 people personally with a personalized email and say, hey, I would really, really appreciate if you could take 5 minutes to fill this out. And the insights that you'll get from that survey could fuel probably 2 or 3 different papers or 2 or 3 different pieces of content. So I think the way to start that, sorry, there's a very long-winded answer to your question, but your question is how do you like find what to ask those ICPs? And it's really like listen to your ICPs and then build very, very specific, very, very defined questions or data points around what your ICP is curious about.
I like that a lot. And it also doesn't seem too hard to do. So I think that's something that definitely founders can take away. You said that you made a mistake where some of your content wasn't related closely enough to your product. What does a good fit look like between content and your product, right? So if you say, hey, I interviewed, a bunch of salespeople in the freight industry, and then it doesn't relate to your product, like, does it need to be highly correlated? Does it have to be, and Freightos can solve that for you tomorrow? Or does it just have to be close enough? How do you approach that?
When you're getting started, every second counts. And I think there's probably a million different approaches to this, and I would never claim to have all the answers. But my typical approach would be like, look, you need to focus on getting customers and getting revenue. And marketers in general have a very, very bad habit of trying to be the New York Times. We're not getting paid to get our name out there and to get article readers. We had when before I got into this direction of content, I think I had seen a BuzzFeed article. This was when BuzzFeed was still a thing, and put together a collection of 10 pictures. I think it was the article was titled like 10 trucks you hope your cargo wasn't on. And it was just pictures of, containers that had flipped off of a truck or a truck that had gone under a tunnel and the container was like half sheared off the top. Within like the freight space, it went like relatively viral. We got a couple 100,000 views in a week. And I was like elated briefly and then realized it did nothing. And it took me 10 minutes to put that article together. Like, what a waste of time. That does nothing for the business. The distraction, and anyone can come up with a vanity metric around website traffic, but who cares? I think that the area that you need to focus on is when somebody reads that content, doesn't need to be everybody, but when somebody reads that, they can walk away with it and be like, oh yeah, that's a real problem. Or, oh my God, this is like a direction that I really need to think about. I wonder who's looking at this direction. Hey, this company wrote this article. They probably know what they're talking about when it comes to this. Something that when a salesperson follows up after somebody downloaded that piece of content, the experience is not disjointed, right? Like, what does that sales email even look like from somebody that downloaded the white paper about Amazon hiring? Right? Somebody downloaded a white paper about who are the supply chain professionals that Amazon is hiring. And the closest you can come is like, yeah, it seems like Amazon's really going in this direction. You need to future proof your technology too in order to beat them. But that feels so disjointed compared to like, hey, you just saw how your 19 competitors are moving online. Let me help you get there first. Right? It's such a different connection. And you really need that segue. You don't want to sell. As soon as you start pushing, selling in your content, people stop reading. But you want to make that segue really, 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 really seamless and ideally have the people reach out to you afterwards in order to get there.
Makes sense. Let's talk about the age of AI. How is AI affecting content creation? I know there's a lot more noise in the market right now. Everyone's, just generating from A to Z. How do you stand out and how do you leverage AI to your advantage?
Yeah, and I think this is still a question that we're going to be living for years. There's a great sci-fi writer named Neil Stephenson who wrote an article. Wrote a book a couple of years ago that has really stuck with me. He's the same guy, by the way, who invented the concept of a metaverse. So real, real smart guy. And in this book, the entire thesis is everybody has their own filter because there was an information apocalypse where people just started to generate random noise of articles with fake information. Imagine like millions and millions of Wikipedias with fake data in order to sell filters or firewalls to only get through the right information. And I think we're there today, right? Where there's just so much junk out there. And anybody right now with Claude and 20 minutes with deep research can put together a competent white paper that will educate customers better than what anybody could have done 10 years ago. So the price of content creation has gone down to zero, and that directly conflicts with this other thesis I've talked about, which is the best way into a customer's heart is to educate them and show that you're a real content expert and you really understand what's happening in the space. So, on the one hand, I think that the bar for creating content has gone up a lot. I think that same idea that I talked about before, which is how do you find the right insights that AI can't find? Right? How do you find collect the right data points? How do you collect the right insights from your target audience? How do you correct the right credibility for the research that you're sharing to be able to say, like, hey, this isn't me. This isn't Claude saying this. This is 30 other people that in your an exact same role that have succeeded wildly over the past year said X, Y, and Z, right? How do you get their attention? I think that's one general area where I think content is really helpful, where help is not as much of a threat. Where AI is helpful is on supercharging some of these motions. So just as an example, right now as we're recording this, we're in the middle of this crazy spin out from tariffs, right? So from the United States applying tariffs all over the world, and that's big news, not only in the shipping space, but globally, because it just means that price of products goes up a lot. Our immediate response to that, a day after the tariffs were implemented, was to put together a survey, send it out to our customer base, and say, hey, how are these tariffs impacting you? Within a day, I was able to solicit a couple hundred responses. We're a more mature company. It's relatively easy for us to get survey responses. Threw that at a new OpenAI model. So I threw it at O3, which is just a phenomenal model in general. Get an analysis off of that, pitch it out, and get onto BBC and into CNN literally within a day, right? An entire once you have your playbook and you have your audience and you know what cuts through the noise, you can bring your content creation time down dramatically. So, I think in that respect, AI can be really helpful for creating the right content faster than anybody else. The third way where I think AI actually can be jujitsu is I've always been a fan of not looking at content just as what do you write. I think that creating your own little tools is with AI is really, really helpful for small businesses or small startups that are getting started. To this day, our best content, and I'm using content in a very loose definition, is taking unique data or unique insights that we have and creating calculators or estimators on our website. And I'm still taking that same playbook today. That online sales white paper that I mentioned that we do annually, we're releasing that same white paper iteration later this month. And one of the things that we've done in order to stick out a little bit is on top of the white paper, I augmented it with 5 interviews that I did together with other leaders in the space. They're talking about, C-suite from some of the largest freight companies in the world. I didn't include the interviews in the report. I created using Cursor my own kind of a website where you can choose, are you a large business, a small business? Are you looking for insights on customer retention or customer acquisition and a couple of other parameters? And then it'll take our report plus the interviews and compile it together into kind of like a personalized on-demand report based off of those unique insights. So I'm using the reach that I have right now, I'm using the content that I have, and I'm using AI to create a unique way to consume that content that hasn't existed before. So I think the same basic premise of content needs to educate and needs to be unique is a little bit harder to do, but if you can do it, I think it's much, much easier. I think the general rule is you need to ask yourself every single time you hit publish, is this something interesting enough that my ICP might take and share with their colleague? And now that's just becoming much, much, much harder because there's so much information out there. But that doesn't mean that people aren't still clicking share with their friends. And you just need to make sure that and with their colleagues, and you need to make sure that that's your bar. Like, is somebody going to say, oh my God, wow, let me share this with my friend to look smart?
For an early stage startup founder who wants to run this playbook and perhaps doesn't have a lot of resources, how would you go about the distribution? Would it be, okay, so you survey those 10 people that you talk to in discovery calls, and then you email new prospects saying, hey, I found this out. Do you want to learn more? How would you go about distribution?
I think part of sometimes the clarity and one of the advantages that a small business has or a small startup has is that they've spent a lot of time thinking about who their specific ICP is. And the more you can narrow that ICP down, the better the content is that you can create and the easier it is to reach those people. There's a correlation between which channel, with the difficulty of channels to get to people at scale versus getting to one person. If your entire startup is trying to sell, software to beverage companies with international distribution, you're reaching out to 20 people on LinkedIn, right? That is clarity. And you're never going to beat the combination of LinkedIn outreach, email outreach, and if you're like going all out, literally just like sending a FedEx package to somebody. Right. That is clarity. It does not take a lot of time. Started a new company, and the entire idea was how do I get in front of marketing professionals at large multinational, um, I don't know, retailers. Right. You have a list of 50 people that you can come up with, and anybody can get access to with Cognizant or Apollo or Lucia. You can get access to who those people are. Reach out to them on LinkedIn, get their email address, reach out to them on by email. If you have the right pitch and you have the right content, they're gonna respond. They will respond. They might not, every single one of them might not, and it might take more follow-ups, but that's clarity, and that's something that a small company has. You don't need to think about scale, right? You're not a scale up, you're a startup, and you just need to think about how do you start your outreach, not how do you scale up your outreach.
Okay, I like that. Do you have a way to go about measuring success of your content over time? We all know that attribution can be really, really hard. How do you measure the impact versus the effort of the type? Let's say you've been going on for a month or 3 months trying to do these surveys, trying to get meetings. How do you know when it's working and when it's not working and you need to make a change?
Yeah, look, in general, I'm not particularly bullish about the future of attribution, right? I think that, I mean, with the exception of e-commerce, um, and things that you're scaling up enough that statistical significance can support. I just don't think that it's there. Like when you have, especially when more and more content consumption is going to be mediated by AI. Right now, we're looking at just saw earlier today that Shopify and OpenAI announced a partnership where you'll be able to purchase things through ChatGPT. Like attribution is gonna be a total mess. So you need to look for other signals, and signals come in the shape of are ICPs talking about your content on the phone. When you run into somebody, I wrote a long white paper that was almost exclusively targeted at one of the largest ocean liners in the world. And then a month later, I was on the phone with somebody for a totally from that company for a totally unrelated reason. And they dropped at the end, like, oh my God, like I got forwarded your report like by 15 other people within the company. And at that point, I'm like, okay, well, it's working. And I don't need more than that. You really need to define like what is the specific goal of a piece of content. Some of them are really, pure brand play. One of the playbooks we've run over time is building out self-service portals for our data, and reporters love it. So every time there's a supply chain crisis or anything happens, they come to our website, they see what freight prices are to ship from China to the United States, and they cite it all over. Now, one of the benefits from that was you get the snowball where the New York Times and CNN and Wall Street Journal will cite our data. They'll backlink to Freightos, and then the next time somebody searches for freight data, our domain equity is there. So they'll find us, they'll cite our data again, and you just snowball to the point where, like during COVID, the White House press secretary was citing Freightos data on the podium when talking about the supply chain crisis. And that wasn't, that was that was a content play that over time, I can't put a number on that. Like I know that, we're doing, six with a seven-figure revenue from selling our data at this point, but you can't necessarily attribute that. But there's signals that I can come back to and say, like, look, this is working. This is working. And that same idea, that same signals, if you send out this report to somebody and they respond and they say, like, wow, this is really interesting, or they ask a question, or even they challenge it, and that shows that they read it, that means that there's something that's working there, and I wouldn't drop it. The other things that doesn't happen overnight, and these things really take elbow grease. It's funny, sometimes it feels like there's a very, very different standard. When you release your MVP product for customers, it's not going to work the first time. It will always take iteration, and content does the same thing. And if you expect you have to put together like a masterful like LinkedIn post and put it up and see it go viral, it's not gonna happen. Like these things come from consistency and getting out there again and again and seeing what works and being open to like the criticism and being self-critical and figuring out what you can improve. And that same process happens for content. Like you just need to keep on working at it and building up that brand and building up what your voice is in order to get out there.
I like that a lot. And we do need to close. We do have just a few minutes left. So I'd like to go into a lightning round and keep answers brief. First of all, are there any things you think we didn't cover? Just like top tips around content that founders should know.
I think AI. I mean, AI. Like just like understanding what are the best practices for it. How do you use it better? How do you incorporate it from a workflow perspective into your content creation and your marketing processes? This is like I see it as like imagine if you had Google and your competitors didn't. 20 years ago, right? This is the game changer. And it's not just about do you have it, it's how do you use it and how incorporated it is it into your processes.
Okay. Any other tips?
Yeah, I would say in general, making sure that you find the three reporters within your industry that are really, really specific. Like, don't, for me, it took me a while to understand that a TechCrunch pickup or a Verge pickup was not worth nearly the same thing that a pickup in American Shipper or a Journal of Commerce, like small supply chain publications, were. So, like, being able to like filter out the vanity metrics, your website traffic doesn't matter. What matters is like, is the right person visiting your website, and being able to really like hold yourself to that and filter out noise and filter out opportunities that seem like they will bring a lot of vanity metrics, but not move a lot of needles from a revenue or ICP perspective.
Are there any good resources for different formats of content that founders can get inspiration from and say, oh, I should do a similar survey to X or to Y?
Yeah, I mean, the best part about this is like we all consume content every single day, and I think it's really about there's I think there's one person that will walk through a subway station in New York and read the ads, and there's another person that will read it and then say, "Hey, why did that just do X for me?" Right? And I think just like training that muscle and understanding like, "Hey, why did I just read this one and not the other one?" Really being understanding like why when I was scrolling through this LinkedIn feed, why did I just stop and look at this picture? When I was on this website, why did I do X? And being able to like try to like find those moments, identify them, and then say like, "Oh yeah, this is cool. Like let's try this out." And just that awareness of like this is something that you should be paying attention to, because the content format that works next week is not the same as the content format that worked last week.
Obviously, there's not one answer over here, and it could be a little bit too high level, but how much time do you think a founder should spend on finding ways to create this valuable content? Because it can take a lot of time.
Look, I think it can take a lot of time, or it can take very little time. The better you know your audience, the easier it will be to think about what the right content is. I think it's a question of how much the founder is struggling to get in front of people. Content in general needs to be a means to an end. It is not the end. Like in general, market visibility is not what it's all about. It's about getting your product in front of people and closing deals. And if the founder's struggling to do that right now with outreach, they need to focus on this. I look in AI in general, but this has already been a trend of it's getting easier and easier to build. Technology is not for most companies, technology is not going to be the differentiator. And what will be the differentiator? My guess is it'll be a combination of brand, of network, and of data. And brand might be the easiest one to crack initially with the right content. So I think it'll become more and more important.
There was a founder that I spoke to that he said he likes to bring on average salespeople on purpose because his first company, it all came from warm connections, and then he slowly realized there was no product market fit. Do you think there may be an issue here where you can have amazing content and then you're getting these meetings, but no one actually wants the product after that, compared
Yeah,
to just
yeah.
a one-line pitch where people just love the idea of the product, so they want to go on a meeting? Like, there is that debate where should I go into this through the content that's amazing, where they want my product after that?
Yeah, look, I think it's two ways to look at the same problem, which is like you need a product that is amazing, but it's hard to do that. It's really, really hard to build a product, and I think a lot of people aren't able to do that. And certainly from day one, unless you're coming in with the right degree of conviction and the right degree of development and infinite resources, you usually need to start some type of evaluation period and get customers and kind of evolve your product over time. I think yes, if you have the ability to wave a magic wand and build a perfect product with a perfect tagline that attracts the perfect people, by all means, like skip brands, that's fine. But I think what's happened over time is like you really need to combine it all. Like if you can get away without it, marketing. If you can get away without marketing, I strongly encourage you to do so. Right? But I think there's a lot of companies that just can't do that. I guess from the flip side, there were certainly times in my time at Freightos where I think marketing was leading, and I would walk around patting myself on the back, but you don't get awarded like for downloads or signups when your underlying product can't do what you want it to do. Like that doesn't help anybody, unless you're just like looking to up your career and then move somewhere else. And it sucks. It sucks when you look around, you're like, hey, I brought in the right person and we couldn't convert that person because it didn't say what it said on the, we could do what it said on the box, or because our sales process wasn't able to support it, or because our customer support wasn't there. So I don't think you ever want one part of your organization to be dramatically farther ahead than the rest of the organization. Like you need to advance in a relatively consistent manner across all fronts.
Eitan, it's been a pleasure. I have a bunch of takeaways here. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.